Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko, commie, soy boy, cuck, Antifa, super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range, but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and I run a food pantry. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination through the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of film like John Grayson's Zero Patient, from 1993, if you want to look it up. And I like movies that are queer and irreverent and spit in the face of power. So, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
Well, it's been a while since we recorded, almost a month, I think, because we banked one or two of them, and then the holidays, which we all love the holidays.
Yay.
But over the holidays, I had a bit of a Coppola fest. My wife had never seen the Godfather movies, so we watched all three in like a 2-day period, and that was super fun.
I love that.
Yeah, it was fun. I was wondering, like, does Godfather III earn the reputation as being bad? And yeah, it does. But the thing that I've forgotten about that I feel like not enough people comment on is the, like, Sofia Coppola character and Andy Garcia character that have the love thing, but they're cousins. And no one in the movie is ever like, you're cousins. It's always like, hey, don't date the boss's daughter, man. And it's like, my wife and I the whole time were like, they're cousins. Why is no one ever saying this? But like the whole time, the first, like, everyone's like, don't date. You guys shouldn't date. But it's never because you're cousins. It's always because Andy Garcia's character shouldn't date the boss's daughter.
They're right for the wrong reasons.
Right. Yeah. I was like, yes, definitely don't date each other. But also, why are none of y'all weirded out about the cousin thing? But
Keep it in La Familia.
This thing of ours. So then that inspired us because I haven't seen any of her early movies in a long time. And I don't think my wife had seen any of the first three Sofia Coppola movies. So we also watched The Virgin Suicides and Lost in Translation.
Ooh, staples of my teenage years.
Okay, this is going to be a good conversation then, because I saw it as like a teenage boy who was like, you know, into like Tarantino and Fight Club and all the teenage boy stuff, and didn't get it probably as a teenage boy. I didn't like not like it or anything. I was just like, okay. And this time I loved both of them. Probably Virgin Suicides a bit more.
Yeah, that's definitely my preference. I wasn't a huge fan of Lost in Translation. I think, you know, you think about 16-year-old me living in South Florida, the like very particular ennui that Bill Murray's character is experiencing was pretty distant to me. But the Virgin Suicides was very poignant and maybe a little too close for comfort. But also, I loved that book when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I've never read the book. I should.
It's worthwhile. But one of the things that's so great about her adaptation of it is that very like ephemeral, like the sense that these girls are kind of just only here but for a moment, and we're capturing them through the window. That kind of dreamy quality that they just their impermanence.
Yeah.
I think is relayed really well in her filmmaking.
Very well, yeah. And I would say that like maybe the reason I also didn't get it as a teenager is I was raised evangelical, and like probably didn't pick up on a lot of the like religious indoctrination that the family, because I was probably experiencing, I mean, not to the same degree, but like experiencing my own version of that. So
there were blinders on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Definitely blinders. And then another one that I did a appreciation of is Jennifer's Body.
Hell yeah.
Okay, so that was one that like I have kind of a fraught feelings about Diablo Cody as a writer in general. I really don't like Juno. I don't know if this is stepping on anybody's.
Stomp on the toes.
Okay, because
I mean,
I feel like it came out and it was like for millennials of a certain age, it was kind of like a defining movie, and I always found it really annoying.
I mean, it's very twee. I think the thing is that,
yeah.
there was a very particular moment in time that was really our high school, like
Sure, yeah.
our high school experiences, maybe a little bit before that, maybe a little bit after that, if we go back as far as like Bottle Rocket, because like Wes Anderson is a part of this moment, kind of a resurgence of Belle and Sebastian.
Yep.
There's like a very particular thing, and it fits into that kind of on the poppier side of things. And I mean, I do like Diablo, Cody. I'm totally fine with artificiality of movies. I mean, I do think that Jennifer's Body has more longevity to it, but I also think that's because horror.
Right, it lends itself.
Yeah, lends itself to the balance of camp and something that feels a little bit raw and more authentic. Like it can kind of navigate those dual streams simultaneously, whereas Juno just kind of exclusively feels almost silly by nature of the way that the dialogue takes form, when it's like, this woman is yelling, or this girl is yelling at like anti-abortion advocate.
All babies want to get born, which I still say that constantly, so I guess that did imprint something on me, but I love that line, that all babies want to get born.
So what is your favorite part about Jennifer's Body, or what kind of popped out for you on this rewatch?
Oh, honestly, it was how I thought that the Diablo Cody dialogue works so much better with Megan Fox, specifically that character doing it. Like, I think maybe that's the disconnect, is that like she's not necessarily supposed to be likable, the Megan Fox character. Like, you're supposed to sympathize with her a little bit, but I think like her doing the kind of over the top Diablo Cody, like now I can't remember any of the lines, but like, this is not from this movie, but the like gag me with a spoon type like high school girl lines, I think like works so much better with that Megan Fox character than Juno, where those are supposed to be like almost endearing lines.
Yes. Yeah. I think I was gonna say endearing. I think it's like the different, it's like Heather's. Like Heather's works because the bitchiness provides the edge that like the wittiness can sit on, versus it all just being like very soft.
Yeah, and there's a cynicism and like a world weariness to it. And also Jennifer's Body doesn't have Rainn Wilson saying that's one doodle that can't be undid.
Okay,
home skillet.
Minus the home skillet, I do say that.
I do say
that kind of frequently. Never about pregnancy, because you can undo diddles unless you live in Florida. I'm gonna talk about that in a second, but it's a lot harder. But I do kind of love that line.
Yeah.
But I agree. Rainn Wilson, maybe not the best deliverer.
Yeah. And also, just to like fully like Diablo Cody, I definitely have her later stuff, especially. I really like Young Adult. And then now I can't remember the movie like a year or two ago. It was the lead character's Tully.
That was more than a year or two ago, but
time is nothing anymore.
Yes, with
Charlize Theron,
yes,
and the woman from the computer show on AMC.
I
have a great brain.
The computer show.
The one that everyone tells me I should watch about like Silicon Valley and the heyday. Mackenzie Davis.
Okay.
Halt and Catch Fire is the name of the show that she was on. And Tully's great.
Yeah, and I think there's a Duplass, at least one in there.
Ooh, the good one or the not as good one?
I don't know, the one that was in the football show.
Which Duplass was in a football show?
The fantasy football show. The League.
The
League.
Yeah, it's the not as good one. I like Jay Duplass more than I like Mark Duplass.
Okay.
For reasons that I can't articulate. But anyways, what about you? What have you been watching lately?
So yesterday, we're recording this on Tuesday, January 17th.
For fidelity.
And yes, just to keep us honest. For the historical record,
yes,
this was recorded. But so yesterday was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I did have to work a little because some students came in to volunteer at the pantry they run. But then after that, I went to go see Saint Omer, which is a film that kind of registered on the top of a lot of critics' best of last year list, but because of the market that we live in, it comes out in January here and not in 2022. It is almost evades description, but I would say a very brief synopsis is a woman who is a Senegalese immigrant to France, murders her child, and is on that does not happen on camera, but that precedes the action of the movie, and is having her day in court. Much of the movie takes place in the courtroom and is a courtroom drama, interrogating her, having witnesses or other people that are party to the circumstances speak. And then witnessing all of this is a writer. It's unclear of exactly what kind of writer she is, to be honest, but it seems to have kind of an academic bent, maybe a novelist or professor of English who also writes, who is attending the trial, watching it, and also learns that she's pregnant during the experience.
Okay.
And it's a movie about colonialism. It's in particular the ways in which colonialism affects racialized misogyny, and the kind of how violence begets violence, and chaos begets chaos. There's a really interesting dynamic where the woman who is watching, her name is Rama, the writer, begins to realize that in some way, she initially feels an affinity with the woman who is on trial, and then kind of slowly evolves through. She's afraid of her. She's afraid of the implications for her own experience of motherhood. She's reflecting on her mother and the toxic relationship that they have. It's a movie that is like very simple in its presentation, but extremely complex in its narrative and its emotional beats. And it's operating on a lot of different levels: interpersonal, political, and I think it is incomparable. Frankly, like there is not another movie I've ever seen that I would say is speaking in exactly the same register.
That sounds dope. Is that in theaters now, you said?
Yeah, I saw it at AMC
Cool.
20 here in Tallahassee, Florida yesterday.
Add that to the list. That sounds really cool. And is the protagonist the woman? Is the story more following the woman on trial or the person writing?
It's more following the person who is writing.
Okay, yeah.
As you see her outside of the courtroom,
Sure,
kind of leading up. But I mean, really, the thrust of this story is the woman who is on trial. Her motivations for the crime, which are not in dispute. Like, she admits that she killed her child.
Right.
But the reasoning why she did it is fluid and evolves as the movie approaches it from different angles.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds dope.
Yeah.
Anything else you've been watching?
So I didn't want anything else I've been watching, but I did want to bring up that tomorrow,
January 18th,
which is a Wednesday, I am going to get a The Thing tattoo.
Oh, hell yeah.
That I'm very excited
I think
about.
you may have told me about this. Tell me what it is.
Yeah, so it's an artist that I've had that has tattooed something else on me. I have like a lady kind of barbarian on my thigh. And he drew a flash sheet that had like that very iconic image from the cover of kind of the light bursting out of face. And so yeah, it's will be like black and gray.
That's awesome.
So
I'm jealous. That sounds cool.
I'm very excited. And then I was thinking, do you have any movie tattoos?
Do I have any movie tattoos? I'm inventorying. No.
No, wow.
No, but I should get a Thing tattoo as well.
Hell
but
yeah.
just a portrait of Wilford Brimley. It's a nice, realistic black and gray of Wilford Brimley. That's awesome. Yeah, do I have any movie tattoos?
I know, right?
I'm now looking around. And
I was driving here and thinking about
I do.
Ooh, what?
It's the dumbest tattoo I have.
Ooh,
and it's
love
like
it.
the religious iconography of like the Virgin Mary cradling the baby Jesus or whatever.
Yes.
I have that, but it's David Lynch holding the little eraser head baby.
I don't think that's dumb at all.
I
I
mean, it's
think
just a
that's
silly idea.
yes. That
But as I gotten more tattoos, they are getting increasingly silly. So I'm all here for it. I did just get a tattoo, and it's of a fancy possum. So
it's
the
great,
tattoos don't get too
listener. It's
much
great.
silly, sillier. Excuse me.
Yeah. On the way here, when I was thinking about this topic, I was like, oh yeah, I think that's my first movie tattoo, and I'm like, no, it's not.
I was gonna say because
What's
I
wrong with
remember
you?
when I first met you and we first started hanging out. One of the first things I learned is that you have a Ghost World tattoo.
I do.
Yeah.
I have two tattoos that are not because of movies, but there are movie adaptations of those um books. And then I have a my favorite tattoo is a movie tattoo. So I have a portrait of Rizzo from Greece
Okay.
on the back of my right calf, where she's licking the ice cream cone while they're in the Frosty Palace, which is the diner in Greece. Um, and then I do have a Ghost World tattoo. I have a tattoo of Enid Coleslaw, and I have a tattoo of Athena, where the drawing is taken from one of the interstitial chapters of Watchmen.
Oh,
Those
cool.
are that actually was my very first tattoo.
The pirate thing.
No, it's from a Dan Dryberg.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Interstitial, where it's one of the chapters where he is essentially is like a little essay of him writing about how, like, if you study, I love birds so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love birds, but when you like interrogate birds too intensely, like they almost lose their beauty. Which kind of speaks to like his impotency throughout the um novel. So I didn't get it because of the impotency piece. I got it because I love the graphic novel and I love Athena. And as an 18-year-old, I was like, yeah, let's do it. That's the best way. But yeah, so I got a couple accumulated. So we'll throw another one in there.
Hell yeah. I almost got a movie tattoo on a whim, and I'm glad I didn't because it probably would have been a very bad idea. I'm a huge fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and a few years ago, my wife went on a work trip to Austin, and the house from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like an
Ooh.
hour outside. I'm trying to remember what the name. Oh, it's this tiny little town called Kingsland, Texas. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go visit that house. Obviously, um, aside, the house is now a breakfast diner. Um, and Kingsland, Texas. Again, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but from what I saw in the restaurant, it's mostly 80-year-old people in Kingsland, Texas,
Like
and then
they
and
are
then
eating
me.
there regardless.
Right,
of-
right, right. And it's a really weird. It's really weird because the house has really no mention of it being the Texas Chainsaw House, like in the like dining area. And then if you go to the back where they have like an event space, they have like merch and Texas Chainsaw stuff all on the wall and all this stuff. But it was really cool. But I almost went like, well, I should commemorate this. And there was like a little real podunk looking tattoo shop right outside of Kingsland. And I almost went in and got one. And then I pulled up and it was 10 o'clock and they didn't open until 11. And I was like, well, nah,
No,
not going to do that.
that's
So, so that was why
I will say
almost got it.
I do think Kate DeCosmo, who's a really brilliant tattoo artist in Tallahassee, if you're listening to this and you don't know who that name is, and she's doing my full back piece, which should be done in the next month also. But she's been doing really beautiful house tattoos
Cool.
in her kind of like traditional style that's very
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
blocky and black and gray driven. I could see something like that.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I will say to end this, the last or the like movie tattoo I really want to get to represent my love of watching movies and the movie going experience, and I do plan to get it within the next year or so, is the classic cartoon image of "Let's all go to the lobby"
Oh, hell yeah. The dancing popcorn.
of the dancing popcorn and the hot dog and the
Yeah,
candy,
that would
and they're
be
holding.
awesome.
I want to get that across the front of my shin.
And I feel like that like art style already lends itself to like a cool looking tattoo.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's bold, and I kind of, I don't know how you approach your body and being tattooed, but I kind of have zones of focus. I would say, like, there are parts of my body that I only want to be black and gray tattooed on,
Sure, yeah,
etc.
yeah.
And my right calf, below my knee, or the shin too, is kind of my what I call like my kitschy calf. So that's
I
where
like that.
Rizzo is.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
got a
yeah.
little like drunk lantern. I have a little TV tattooed there, so I'm gonna get it there to round it out and commemorate my love of the
That's
pictures.
awesome. Hell yeah. Um, well, moving on to current events. What? Oh fuck, forgot what my line is. Let me pull up the script again. Moving on to current events. What's happening in the world this week that's got you celebrating or in despair?
Well, Politico is reporting this morning, again, that's Tuesday, January 17th, 2023, year of our Lord, that Circuit Court Judge here in Tallahassee, Angela Dempsey, ruled that Governor Ron DeSantis has executive privileges and is able to essentially withhold some information from the public regarding his decision making process and outcomes. And the reason I wanted to raise this is because there's a lot of things that fucking suck about living in Florida. If you've been listening to this for a minute, we rant about Florida routinely. It's not the best context for organizing, but you know, you do what you can with what you got where you are. But one of the things that is pretty bomb about Florida typically is that we have really broad public record laws.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, like you can get way more than in other states in-depth information on legislative histories, emails, like you could request the emails of any public official that you wish, anyone that works for state government. Um, so it is fully outrageous to make this decision, especially given that previous court decisions have rejected the idea of executive privilege for whoever holds the governor's seat. And also, I just have to say, like, I just have a bone to pick with this asshole. And I mean, Ron DeSantis is an asshole
Which
too.
one?
I got a lot of bones
Yeah,
to
yeah.
pick with fucking Ron DeSantis, but I got a bone to pick with Circuit Court Judge Angela Dempsey, because I was reading this Politico story and I was like, I recognize this last name. Why do I recognize this woman's name? Aside from, you know, I read the news, etc., and I was like, oh, she's the same judge that in April of last year, in 2022, um, upheld the 2015 24-hour waiting period in order to access abortion care. So that's why her name is emblazoned in my mind, because she's a nasty little habit of making decisions that are undemocratic and reflect the perspective and interests of those in power. So I hope she's having a horrible fucking night, honestly. How about you?
I hope she's having a bad night too. And to be clear, this January 17th is the night that we hope she's having a poor night.
And maybe the next few too.
Yeah.
You know, 18, 19, 20.
Well, I'm going to continue the theme and also complain about Ron DeSantis because Ron DeSantis is continuing his war on education and teachers in Florida, specifically teacher unions in Florida. What he is trying to do now is essentially make it harder, more difficult to join a teacher union and stay in the union. What he has proposed is, and he's trying to frame it as giving teachers the power back in their paychecks. Is what he is proposing is removing the ability for unions to collect dues through automatic deductions in their paychecks. He's trying to make a rule where the Florida teachers unions have to collect dues monthly by hand on it through a check, because obviously that is burdensome and would discourage people from joining and or staying in the unions. And this is not new. He's proposed this before. But what is new is this last election cycle in which he dumped somewhere around $2 million into candidates, school board candidates who represented Moms for Liberty and all that. 75% of those Moms for Liberty candidates won. And that means he now has a lot more sway within county school boards. So I do expect this to become a thing going forward, in that he is making it clear that teacher unions specifically are kind of on the chopping block. I mean, I would say that I think the teacher unions in Florida have plans in place. I think that it is going to be, my guess would be it is going to be a fight that he was not prepared for, but at the same time, he's making no bones about the fact that he is no supporter of unions, specifically teacher unions in Florida.
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised this, Craig. One, because it's important that people understand the barriers that teachers are facing in terms of access to collective bargaining and supports. while they're being attacked by our government, but also because I see a connection between things like that 24-hour waiting period to access abortion care and these additional rules and regulations as it relates to union due collection, because ultimately it's about using bureaucracy as a cudgel,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And making processes as complex and challenging as possible so that people who know what they want should be able to freely associate with the people that they want to, don't have the ability to make decisions about themselves and their own lives, because the government has to make it as onerous as possible.
Yeah, yeah. And props where it's due to Ron DeSantis. He's really good at reframing terrible ideas in a way that like people who aren't quite paying attention will be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like he went to the Frank Luntz School, which, listener,
Right.
if you're not familiar with who that is, he's the Republican pollster and strategist who came up with such terms as death panels.
Hell yeah, the death panel. The death panel guy. Yeah, Frank Luntz is a nightmare because he is so like aware of what he is. Like he knows. So like, what do you do with a guy like that?
He's like the fruit ninja equivalent, you know. He's just
Right.
like,
Yeah. But yeah, I was gonna. The one thing, the term that he's really kind of shot to the forefront as far as when it comes to schools is parents' right to choose. If you see that, that's probably some anti-gay or anti-trans stuff reframed as the idea that like, don't you want to have a say in what your kids are learning? So the idea that like he's empowering parents in their kids' education, it is just a Frank Luntz-ism. To be clear, I don't think Frank Luntz had anything to do with this,
right,
but it's a Frank Luntz-ism to basically just not say we don't like trans kids. It's like a nicer way of saying it, a more like Fox News friendly way of saying it.
Related to that particular thread, did you see that today there was also news regarding the lawsuit that came out of Leon County against Leon County schools relating to allegedly teachers discussing pronouns and bathroom usage with a student outside of the realm of their parents' consent? That's what is alleged by the parents. That a federal judge knocked it down, gave an order to dismiss, and said this is not appropriate for this setting. Now, again, that does nothing for the state claims, right? Like, but essentially, it had to meet a very high standard of being like outrageously offensive to the senses, or whatever that kind of legalistic language they use to try and set like a really high, unreasonable standard. That it did not meet that and was smacked down.
Hell yeah.
So
I did not see that, but I'm glad to hear it because I'm aware of that case, and it is stupid.
Yes, it is.
It is baseless. Anyways,
it is in fact not based.
Correct.
The little beat construction.
Yeah, we know internet lingo. So moving on, let's talk about. We're gonna do a top. Normally it's a top 3 list, but this week it's gonna be a top 5 list because this is our first episode of 2023, which means it's time to look back at 2022.
Boo! No.
Yeah, I mean,
movie wise, actually, let's ask this: what's your perspective? As a longtime movie watcher, how would you rate, let's say, out of 10, last year? In terms of overall offerings,
So
when you average across, you think about the year in your film viewing, what do you give it?
It's tough because I feel like there's a shitload of great genre flicks last year.
Hell yeah, there were
a lot of good genre flicks, and then a lot of fluff.
Scrum.
Yeah, and then a lot of, honestly, I didn't see as many movies as I feel like I normally do in a year. I think I only saw like around 40 new movies from 2022. I've just been real busy. But yeah, I don't know, maybe a 6 or a 7.
Okay. Yeah, about 7 is where I'm at.
Yeah.
The new stuff that came out that I saw that I liked, I really, really liked. And especially coming out of the previous year where things were kind of lagging because of the lockdown, things not being as in production or being delayed to be released, even if they were completed. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like it was a pretty strong year.
Yeah,
overall.
Definitely. And looking at my own top 5 here, 4 out of the 5 are like firmly like genre flicks and genre experiments, and whatnot. So
yeah, a lot of mine are as well.
Would you want to start us off with your number 5
Sure.
of 2022?
Should I say the honorable mentions at the end?
Go ahead and say them.
Okay. So one of them two of them I'll leave off because they're on Craig's actual list. But the ones that are on my honorable mentions that are not on either of our lists would be Peter Strickland's Flux Gourmet. It is not his best movie, in my opinion. But I fucking am obsessed with Peter Strickland. Like, these British men that make weird, really formalistic movies. He gets me. I vibe with him the same way I vibe with Greenaway. Have you ever seen any of his?
I have not. I know there's so
Fabric.
many in Fabric and Flux Gourmet. I know, and then
The Duke of Burgundy.
Yeah,
and then
Barbarian.
Yeah.
Sound Studio, is that what it's called?
Yes, I have not seen that.
Okay, yeah,
which is his first.
Yeah, I'm aware of him, but have not.
You gotta watch In Fabric.
Yeah, I know they all.
In Fabric is, especially because you love genre film. And you can get into stuff that's like a little more. It is just such an odd duck that's really hard to put a pin in.
Yeah.
But it's like fucked up. It's campy. It's like psychedelic. Oh man, love it. So Flux Gourmet doesn't reach those registers for me, but really good. Saw it at Cap City. I think it was actually the first movie that Cap City had in 2022 as a like new release that it was screening, which it used to do before the pandemic, but they have not done since.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And
for those unaware, I think we mentioned it before, but Cap City Video Lounge is in Tallahassee here, is a movie rental place and a one-screen theater that just shows like awesome like cult flicks and is just run by a really great dude who just has a all-around appreciation for movies, and it's just a cool place to hang out, especially if you're a movie fan.
Yeah, for sure. And there have been screenings that Craig has co-hosted with Kevin.
Oh, yeah. If you're in
kind
Tallahassee.
of connected with the podcast, but not directly, or not fully wrapped up in it. So if you're in Tallahassee, definitely check that out. But
First Fridays of the month.
Yes, first Friday of the month. But yeah, I mean, and so I saw that movie. I saw Flux Gourmet there. And there's several other of these films that you can rent there. So you should check it out, or your local video store if you're not in Tallahassee. And if you're not in Tallahassee, that means you probably don't know us. So thanks for listening. That's cool. The other two movies in my honorable mention are Prey. We've talked about that a little already, so we don't need to go into it. But, the next entry in the Predator series. And then Luca's Bones and All, the teenage Badlands cannibal narrative, and we talked a little bit about that last time, so I'll skip that. But my number 5, dun 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 dun, is Pearl.
Ooh, I haven't seen it.
It's so wild.
There's a reason. Do you want my reason before you get into it?
Yes.
I have a friend who I saw X in the theater, and I saw a friend that I was like, you would like X. We should watch X. You should come over and we should watch X. And then we did, and then we're like, there's a new one called Pearl coming out. We should watch that. And this friend was like, yes, we definitely should. And I have a weird thing that if like I verbally commit to watch a movie with somebody, I feel like
you're locked in.
Yeah. So I've been like, and we've had to reschedule. So I've been waiting to watch Pearl with this friend.
That's fair. But you definitely have to watch it. And I'm just gonna say this because it's not a spoiler. But never in my life did I think I would be sitting in a movie theater and watching a woman hump a scarecrow.
Oh man, this sounds great.
But also I really love, and in the last year my love has only grown. I've watched a lot of Douglas Sirk films. I really like a Technicolor melodrama, and this movie is like not quite that because it's more expressly a horror film, but it's playing on those beats. So I'm a big fan. How about you? What is your number 5?
My number 5 is a movie that I had probably the most fun watching this year, which is Everything Everywhere All at Once by the Daniels, aka Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. I don't know if that's how he pronounces it. Those are the guys that did Swiss Army Man, which is a movie I also enjoyed, if not thought maybe a little too twee at times.
My mom went to go see that movie.
Yeah?
By herself.
knowing what it was?
No, absolutely not. No, like in theaters, when it came out, and I just remember her texting me, being like, "What is going on?
What? I'm
what
sorry.
in ever loving fuck
The
is
farts
going
do
on?"
what now? But Everything Everywhere All at Once is great. It's a lot of fun. But I feel like everyone's talked about Everything Everywhere All at Once so much. I just want to shout out another thing that everyone talks about is that Michelle Yeoh is awesome in that movie. She is great. She has so much to do and so much to carry on her shoulders in that movie, and she absolutely crushes it. And then the other person who I think absolutely crushes it in that movie is, and now I'm embarrassing myself because I have to look up his name, but is Ki Hoi Kwan, who we might remember as the little boy Short Round in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But I find him absolutely charming in Everything Everywhere All at Once. I just had a great time watching that movie.
Yeah, it's a great time. I think you know, one of the things that can be one of the something that can mark a great piece of art is different people leaving with different interpretations of their experience, the meaning it intended to convey. And I think something that's really powerful about Everything Everywhere All at Once is that is a phenomenon embedded in it, but it also is like that for individual viewers across the movie.
Sure.
Like that movie started and I was like, this movie is about the second generation immigrant experience. And then
by the end,
45 more minutes happened. I was like, oh no, this movie is about how do you confront your life when you look back on it and realize you failed to achieve anything that you wanted to achieve. And then it's like, no, 30 minutes later, it's like, no, this is about a mother-daughter relationship. So, it just is, it's wild how much is shoved in that bitch.
Yeah. And without feeling overstuffed. Like,
In fact, it's like, give me more.
Right, yeah, it moves at such a clip that, like, yeah. Anyways, what's your number 4 movie of 2022?
My number 4 is from my number 1 dude, David Cronenberg.
Oh, hell yeah.
Crimes of the Future.
Oh, that movie's so gross.
Yeah. I loved how
gross. In the best possible way.
I loved how gross it was. I was going back and looking at my Letterboxd review for this movie, and what I wrote in it, I stand by, and I feel the same way. I actually watched Videodrome for the 1000th time a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking something similar, which is that he makes movies that are incredibly simple. Like, it is, Crimes of the Future is, what if people ate plastic? It's like really, like literally a sentence or two summary, right? That gets down to its core. But then layered on top of that is so many additional dimensions that color how you interpret it and how it is analogizing real life in some way, and particularly real life as it relates to our relationship with technology, right, as one of the reoccurring obvious themes of his work. And I saw Crimes of the Future very much does that. It's like, yo, they're eating plastic, weird. But then it's also like, what does artistic creation look like at the end of history? Like, I don't know. It's I was a big fan of it, and I was really glad that Viggo Mortensen was in one of his body horror movies after we've seen him in some of his more Eastern Promises,
and
right?
History of
and
Violence.
History of Violence.
Yeah,
I believe. So this would be the third, but the 2 of non-body horror.
Yeah. So this is his first. Right. I got confused there, but I got M&Ms thrown at me when I saw History of Violence in the theater
by a teenager
for a crime I did not commit.
Was it a crime of
talking during the movie theater?
No,
I went with
talking in the movie theater is kind of a crime of the past, really.
For sure, and let's be clear, I was upset about it as well. I was in high school and I went with the dumbest oh man, what if he listens somehow? He doesn't listen. I'm not gonna say his name, but he doesn't listen. I went with the dumbest dude I knew in high school, and who just could not handle anything. And there's a few sex scenes in there
Yeah.
But the one where she's dressed like a cheerleader, do you remember that sex scene? Like, this idiot that I went to high school with starts being like, oh, oh, and like hooting and hollering over it. And this woman, like rightfully so, turns around, sees me, and just chucks a handful of M&Ms at me. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to say anything because you were right to do that. You just completely got the wrong target.
Wrong target.
Right. It's like, I'm just as upset at you as you, but I got hit with the M&Ms. So anyways, that was a bit of a digression.
A man once dumped a bucket of popcorn on my father's head for telling him to be quiet in a movie theater.
That is awesome. A whole bucket?
Snack-based warfare.
Wait, was it his own bucket?
Yes. So the man was really fucking himself over. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I was gonna
clearly,
say.
judgment, I would not say is the, strong suit of someone who's doing that. But how about you? What is your number 4? And I will say 4 and 5 were the movies from my honorable mentions.
Right,
that are on your list.
Well, my number 4 is Robert Eggers' third feature film, The Northman, the Viking revenge tale featuring Bjork, which those are some great scenes. I like a genre flick, and I am like a revenge movie is just like so up my alley. I just like a simple premise, and The Northman is a very simple premise, especially when you juxtapose it with The Witch and The Lighthouse, which I feel like are so much more like esoteric and
definitely The Lighthouse for sure.
Yeah, and like ephemeral. Whereas I mean, The Northman does have like some weird shit in it, but it is kind of just a straight up.
It's an epic.
Flick.
Yeah, it's an epic. No, this movie is I love this movie. I mean, it just speaks to how great last year was. My husband and I saw it in theaters. I dug it. I was like, I'm here for this. We watched it over winter break in December, and it bumped up like a full star for me on reviewing. Like, I think it is really solid filmmaking. The very end of it, it loses a little bit of steam for me. Like, by the time he is actually engaged in the revenge, I don't really care. But all the lead up to it, yeah, I really love it. But I'm also like, I loved The Green Knight. Like, I like the mythic.
Yeah,
the myth building.
And I'll also say that Alexander Skarsgård I find really compelling. Just in everything. Like, I love a like beautiful, menacing weirdo, and he's
a very good actor.
Yeah, he captures that in like every performance. Just like, yeah, he's just such a strange, weird, compelling person to watch on camera. Like in almost everything he's in, that I just really enjoy watching him.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was quality. Honestly, my least favorite performance in it is Anya. I think she is totally fungible in that role. Like, she could be replaced by anyone who is also beautiful.
Sure, yeah.
And I like her a lot. That's not I think she's great. She's really good in The Menu. Like,
which I just saw, by the way.
Witch, nice. Oh, yeah.
Liked it a lot.
Like I said,
it was almost my number 5.
I think that would be appropriate for an episode.
Which I was prepared to hate it for the first half, because I was like, if I'm supposed to like this Nicholas Hoult character, I'm gonna revolt and flip this goddamn table over, because I could not tell for the first half of the movie if I was supposed to like be into the Nicholas Hoult character in The Menu. And then when it finally was like, no, this guy's an asshole, I was like, thank God, now I can enjoy this movie.
I can settle in. But yeah, I think she, and not that she does a bad job, but it's just, she's not particularly enrapturing in it. But Nicole Kidman people always accuse, I am long-term Nicole Kidman lover, so you'll never catch me saying this, but, classic criticism with her is like, she's icy. She's so cold. And she was like a firestorm, just like a rage lit underneath her that I was really about. I want to see her in more stuff where she's really given it and not always playing the kind of dimmer, quieter, a little submerged role.
Yeah. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is Nope.
Oh!
Nope.
Nope.
Yup. Yeah.
Never mind. This is too stupid. I just saw a funny joke on Twitter that said, like, all of Jordan Peele's filmography sounds like a really awkward conversation at a party.
Whoa.
Get out. Us? Nope.
Nope.
That was see, I
Yeah,
told you it was too stupid. So you liked Nope?
Yeah, I really like Nope. I mean, I love another movie that could have gotten honorable mentions for me. It was The Fablemans this year. I really did enjoy that a lot, and I love the reason why I bring it up in relation to this is I do like movies about movies, you know, and so I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Again, related to The Fablemans, it feels like a Spielberg movie. It makes to me this is the movie that made me go like he is an unmatched
Uh-huh.
talent. Like Get Out and Us are great.
Mm-hmm.
They are smart social horror films. But we've had smart social horror films. We have not had this.
Yeah.
That has horror elements, is bringing in the social critique and still centering a critique of race, and racial inequities in the United States, but just dreaming so big, being just like just beautiful, like just real. This is real, like master level shit. Like
Really
he
good. Yeah.
fucking blew me away with this.
Yeah, and without saying like what the thing is, I know it's been out for a while, but the kind of twist on like the classic I mean I think it's evident in the
I mean, it's definitely
trailers
about
that it's like
aliens.
aliens
Yeah.
and shit, but the twist on like how the alien presents itself is great.
It's so beautiful. Like
Yeah.
it's also just like strikingly beautiful. There's multiple parts of the movie that are strikingly beautiful. It's like the scenes with Stephen Yeun
Mm-hmm.
on the
that's
cliff
really good. Yeah.
are just could be paintings. Like this to me was just like the next level of I can't wait to see what's just stating in there.
Yeah.
And that, I think the culture, and I mean that in a very broad sense, deserves artisans who care about producing things that are like widely available and can be consumed by a variety of audiences.
Sure.
And that's again another way, like very Spielberg.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I was really really into Nope this year. What is your third movie, which I have not even heard of? I don't think.
Oh really? It is.
Yeah.
It is great. I just saw
Is
it
it
over.
animated?
It is not. It's a documentary.
Ooh,
And it is a
tell me
documentary
this.
about one David Bowie.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
called
Yes.
Moon Age Daydream, which is a really like kaleidoscopic, uh, uh, just real like trippy look at kind of David Bowie's life and career. Not a lot of like talking head stuff. A lot of like really like unearthed archival footage of performances and things like that, and like just great music. Obviously, it's just a really awesome documentary, a music documentary, and it's from the director is Brett Morgan, who is the guy he did Montage of Heck, which is the
Yes.
really good Kurt Cobain documentary, and there are like animated. The Kurt Cobain documentary had animated elements of it, and there are animated elements in Moon Age Daydream as well. He also did The Kid Stays in the Picture, which is the really good documentary about Robert Evans, the like wild 1970s movie producer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Moon Age Daydream is great. I would recommend, especially if you're a David Bowie fan. Like it is, it's just a great time, like a great movie to just put on and let happen to you.
Oh, experiential.
Yeah, it's really good, and like
It sounds like a good painting accompaniment. Like I love
definitely.
I love to put on a movie and paint.
Yeah,
Especially in summer.
And what I like about it that I feel like modern documentaries are shy more and more away from. Like so much of documentaries now are just like talking heads recounting an event, and this is just archival footage that just kind of unfolds and tells the story on its own. If that makes sense. Like
It absolutely does.
yeah,
I mean, I think
it's not rushed to present a like full picture of a life or anything, and honestly it's not really even interested in David Bowie's life. It's interested in his art.
it sounds like I imagine like given its title, probably pretty interested in the Ziggy persona.
Definitely, yeah. They definitely it does break down specifically the Ziggy and Hal and Craig. Um, it's most of the footage is from that era of David Bowie.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite documentaries, and actually my next movie is a documentary that does this as well, are documentaries that are interested in fully probing the boundaries of filmmaking in that particular um, arena, right? That like just in the same way that all narrative movies don't look the same way or use the exact same conventions or hew to this line in a very particular way, documentaries don't have to either. And I think that people not being exposed to a wider variety of documentaries makes them less likely to be interested in them because I think that talking head is very, well, now, frankly, it's very like Netflix true crime.
Right. Yeah.
But I think in our past is a little bit more like PBS. I don't mean Kent Burns specifically, but kind of PBS educational.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's good to be introduced to things that expand the definition of what's possible in documentary filming. And I'm not saying that like there aren't other things that do that in the past, but just for listeners maybe who have not explored outside, not everything has to be like people talking at you.
Right. Yeah.
And my number 2, which relates to that, is Riotsville, USA. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of it. I have not seen it.
Okay. I saw it at the Tallahassee Film Festival in September of 2022, and was honestly the primary reason like bought tickets for the festivals. I had a friend who saw this very early on at a screening that was done by the documentarian who was traveling around and showing it to different groups that organize against police brutality and police crimes. And she said, like, how you have to see this. Like, you're going to love this. And she was fucking right.
Hell yeah.
It also is not talking head. There is a little bit of voiceover in it, but it's primarily made up of archival footage related to a cop city that was used to train cops in the mid 20th century. And obviously, or maybe not obviously, I don't know what all listeners' frame of reference are, but this has particular relevance right now because of the Cop City battle that's going on in Atlanta, in the Atlanta forest, with the Atlanta Forest Protectors, who are trying to stop Atlanta Police Department from building a little fake town where they can essentially practice bashing in people's heads. That's what these cities are. So Riotsville, USA is about a place like that has already existed.
Okay.
And it's a lot of archival footage of the cops actually practicing, of this place being built.
Oh, wow.
And it's really powerful, and both, I would say, optimistic and pessimistic from the perspective of it's good for us to situate current organizing and agitation in the context of other people have been through this battle before. But the flip side of that is, holy shit, we're doing the same fucking shit that we've been doing for fucking 50 years,
Which might come back up when we discuss the main movie.
Yes.
BPM.
Yes. So it's really good. I highly recommend it. And it definitely is approaching the issue with a critical lens.
That sounds dope. I gotta add that to the list.
What's your number 2?
My number 2 is one that we don't have to spend a lot of time on because we already talked about it briefly. It is X, the first film in the X Pearl, whatever the next one's called, trilogy. Maxine, yeah. I love a just dingy, gritty. I mean, I already said that Texas Chainsaw is my favorite movie, so I just love like a ditty. What did I even say now? Dirty, grungy. I don't know what words are. I just liked X a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You love a dirty ditty.
Dirty. I love the X I love the dirty ditty in X.
Same.
Which reminds me, do you remember when P. Diddy really tested out one of his worst names, which was he went on Saturday Night Live and insisted that people call him Diddy Dirty Money? Do you remember that era?
I do not. That must have been a 5-minute decision.
It was. It was like when Snoop went to Snoop Lion and then was like, this is a bad idea.
Yeah, he said, never mind.
But anyways, yeah, X is awesome. I love Ty West in general. Mia Goth is great. Everyone is great. X is awesome. I am as mentioned before, gonna see Pearl very soon, and I'm very excited, and I'm excited for Maxine. Like, these movies are cool as hell. As someone who, as also mentioned earlier, grew up evangelical and very religious, X spoke to me on that level as well about like just the way religion will just completely fuck you up in a number of different ways, but especially around sex and things like that. Like, X is just a super fun, awesome movie.
It is. Are you, just because you mentioned Mia Goth, and I mean, obviously, I already talked about Cronenberg, a different Cronenberg. Are you excited to see Infinity Pool
Yes.
when it comes out next
Yeah.
week?
I know almost nothing about it other than weird trailers I see on YouTube videos.
Oh,
But
I
yeah,
can't
Brandon
wait.
Cronenberg looks weird as hell.
Also, Alexander Skarsgård. Speaking, I was like, there's a lot
Hell
of
yeah.
the constellation of
Yeah, I'm
points
trying
here.
to not know anything about it
All
other than the weirdness I've seen in trailers.
Yes, yeah, I have not investigated a lot beyond that, but there are some. I can't remember if maybe you and I already had this conversation on air, or I was talking to a friend, another friend about it. But there are scenes or shots in the trailer that are giving me big like Solo vibes.
Mm.
And like there's one where a bunch of people are on leashes and like they
Mhm.
seem to be naked. I mean, obviously you can't see their naked bits
Yeah, we're gonna
in
have
the
to do
trailer.
Solo eventually, right?
But yeah, we need to do a Pasolini series.
Sure, yeah.
Oh my god, I love him.
Well, we'll do him after we get through our Ben Shapiro series.
Ben Shapiro,
Ben Shapiro,
Paolo Pasolini,
and the rest of the directors.
Okay, so my number one is a movie that I just wish I could like buy a copy and press it into the hands of any queer femme person who is like wrestling with notions of their own masculinity. I was joking with a friend that Jay Habermas's film Female Masculinity, like this book or this movie, like embodies these principles, and that movie is called Please Baby Please.
Okay. I don't know this movie.
I saw it through the good grace of a friend, I'll say. And it's now available through Music Box Pictures. Like Music Box Theaters has like a distribution. I think it's called Music Box Pictures. And you can rent it through VOD. It's like $4. This movie is like if John Waters made a jazzy musical that was like slightly more serious than most John Waters movies are, but was equally campy.
Sold.
Just fucking blew my socks off. Like
Yeah.
I literally cried during it. It's like howling, laughing. It's beautiful. Like all of it is like bisexual lighting, meaning for people that don't know what I'm talking about, red, blue, and purple. Just like can't fully describe in words how much this movie meant to me this last year.
That's awesome. You give me several movies that I need to check out ASAP here because that sounds really cool. And looking at it, it stars Andrea Riseborough.
Yes.
Who I like because she was in Mandy, which is
yes, exactly. She's in Mandy.
Yeah.
Neville Longbottom.
Oh, that guy
is in it.
Okay.
Demi Moore has
a
cameo in it. I mean, it's not a tiny cameo. Like she's in like the scenes are a little longer, but she's not a major role. It's a minor role. And then Cole, the comedian, I can't remember his last.
Cola Scola.
Yeah, Cola Scola. Yeah, the
that
cast
guy is funny.
Is great. It is just like beautifully made, but also in a way that is like kind of one of the more like when John Waters talks about the definition of camp, which is like essentially when you try and aim for something, but your resources don't allow you to meet that, and like the gap between the two can be camp. That's obviously different than the Susan Sontag definition of camp, but I see a lot of that happening here where it's just like you could see with a lot more money what could have been done, but what they did with what they had.
That sounds awesome. I gotta check that out.
Highly recommend.
Can I also say that Cola Scola is the butt of maybe the funniest joke on Difficult People? Did you ever watch Difficult People on Hulu?
Yes, I did watch Difficult
Loved
People.
it. And one of my favorite jokes, which is extremely dark and just messed up, but I love it, which is Cola Scola's character is like a dude who's just always annoying Billy Eichner's character. And at one point, Billy Eichner gets mad at him and says, "Why haven't you drowned in Bryan Singer's pool yet?" Which is, which is such a, man, just a killer joke that is just pitch black. Okay, so moving on to my number one.
Ding, ding, ding.
It's Barbarian, the movie that I said, "Oh hell yeah," the most times at this entire year. I just love Barbarian. Like, it is just wild as hell from start to finish. It's got some pretty cutting social commentary in there, and I just love a movie that can completely do a 180 halfway through and kind of change the trajectory, and it doesn't interrupt. Like, it like pulls a Psycho where, like, just as in Psycho where the kind of protagonist of the character changes halfway through the movie, Barbarian does it too. And man, I just love this movie. And Justin Long, like, I don't know how we're supposed to feel about Justin Long in 2023, but I love the guy. Like, I think anytime he pops up in something, I'm like, well, this is going to be interesting. Yeah, he's great in Barbarian, and yeah, this movie is just wild and just it is my kind of movie, as they say.
Yeah, that is fair. I will say I'm definitely not as hot on it. But the movie that it reminds me the most of, and because Justin Long is also in it, it's going to sound like I'm saying it because of Justin Long, but it's really not. It reminds me a lot of Jeepers Creepers.
Ooh, that's what I thought you might say.
Like, just in terms of not necessarily that total switch up, but the kind of horror it's presenting and how it's something that is like, you know, the griminess kind of increases the further you get into the movie. There are jump scares, but it's not exclusively jump scare driven. Like, it just gave me big Jeepers Creepers vibes. I will say this movie, which I won't spoil the context because I think it's a really fun moment of the movie, but probably the most fun moment in a horror movie this year for me, where someone says something about something not happening and then that thing happens.
Okay.
And I screamed. Like, not like screamed in laughter. And I
Oh yeah, it's really funny too.
Yes,
like,
I love a horror comedy. Like, that is definitely a particular kind of horror movie I like a lot. So it definitely did well for me on that level. But also, I think I watched it slightly too late in the cycle. I read a lot of movie shit. I listen to a lot of movie podcasts. You know, I consume a lot of that media. And I didn't know what happened in it, but it was just so built up as like, this is such a great movie. And then when I watched it, I was like, is it?
Yeah.
You know, but I think if I had seen it, you know, 2 steps forward in that cycle, that media cycle, I would have been more excited by it.
Sure, yeah. And Skarsgård, another Skarsgård in it.
True. Yeah, creepy eyeball Skarsgård.
Creepy eyeball Skarsgård, yeah. And creepy lip Skarsgård.
Yeah. His face has like too many curves on it or something.
Let me look at this guy. What? I was trying to defend him, and then I pulled up a picture, and I'm like, yeah, he is.
Oh, I defend his talent. You know,
sure.
There's a reason that
like
he is the Skarsgård that's in horror movies. Okay,
right, yeah.
And it's because his face has too many curves on it.
Right. You get Alexander when you need some just raw talent. You get Stellan when you need raw sexuality.
Gravitas.
He's probably a sexy guy. He's just old, which is why I did that.
Yeah, he was.
No shade.
There's something. What's the? This is not the movie I was thinking of, but he does play one of the love interests in Mamma Mia.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I have an inside joke that I do to my wife, and I don't even know if I've ever told her that it's an inside joke. I just call him this, but have you ever listened to Doug Benson and his I Love Movies?
I have, yes.
Early on in his podcast, I think he accidentally called Stellan Skarsgård Stellar Skateboard. So now, anytime he comes up, I just refer to him as Stellar Skateboard because it's a way more fun way to say it. Well, that was great. We did our top 5 of 2022, which now leads us, are we ready, to get into the main event
Most indeedly do, but wasn't there something you wanted to talk about before we fully dive into
Fuck. This means I
the
told you.
film?
This means I told you that we wanted to talk about something, and have
No,
now
it
forgotten what
is
it is.
literally in the script.
Oh yeah.
Little self
Gonna
promo.
cut all this out. So I usually wait until the end to do this, which I realize is silly. But hey, if you're listening, please make sure you rate and review and do all those things that all podcasts tell you to do, because it definitely helps the algorithms. Don't ask me to tell you how it helps. I just know that it does help. So please, if you're listening and you have been listening for the past 5-6 episodes, please rate and review on whatever podcasting platform you are using. So that was the thing that I had forgotten.
Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like.
Right?
We're almost certainly going to ignore the second piece, but
Yes.
you know, I
Most
like
definitely.
a little bit of self-flagellation. I like to suffer a little. Tell me that my voice is annoying.
I don't like that.
that we
So
just-
send those just out.
I'm just kidding. I'm being sarcastic. But I'm always open to friendly criticism. So,
Hell yeah. So, let's get into it. The movie we're here to discuss today is BPM, a film that is an unflinching depiction of grassroots activism during the height of the AIDS epidemic. Founded in New York City in 1987, ACT UP saw chapters open up across the world with the singular goal of ending the AIDS epidemic. Written and directed by Robin Campillo, BPM focuses on the organizing efforts of ACT UP Paris and its members in the early 1990s. Hal, this was your pick, so how do you feel about this movie before we dive in?
I fucking love this movie. I love this movie from the first time I saw it. This is the number one, I think, is the best movie I've ever seen in terms of accurately depicting what the nitty-gritty aspects of organizing actually look like. Number two, My French Girlfriend, Adele Hanon, is third build.
I don't know who that is. What else has she been in?
Have you seen Portrait of a Lady on Fire?
No, I have not. I know I need to. Is she the lead in that?
Yes. I mean, she's one of two leads. I mean, it's about two women who are in love.
Gotcha.
But yes, she is one of two leads. And she's a very solid working French actress. She is she dated Celine Sciamma for a while. When she was younger, she was in Celine Sciamma, that's the director of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. She was in a movie of Sciamma's called Water Lilies, which is a really beautiful and tragic movie about very young queer girls navigating their feelings and the discovery of that in the context of being synchronized swimmers.
Okay.
She was in that. She's also a total fucking badass that a couple of years ago she was invited to the César, the French equivalent of the Oscars, and they were I can't remember if Polanski was given an award, actually was awarded one or was given an honorary award or something, but she stood up in the audience and started fucking yelling
while he was up there.
Yes.
That's
and
awesome.
Sciamma, I think they were there. I think it was the same year that Portrait of a Lady on Fire came out.
Okay.
Because Sciamma was also there, and I don't think they were dating anymore at that point. And they left a big group of queer women
That's
and were yelling and left together. So I fucking love her. Also, she's a little more masculine in real life. She's really hot. I'm obsessed with her. I fucking love her. And then
Great eyebrows.
Great eyebrows. Yes. And number three, I think this movie is very intensely emotionally evocative.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And so those three things, kind of realistic portrayal of social movements, being really intensely emotional, connecting, and Adele really really does it for me. What was your general read?
Yeah, I also really liked it. I had not seen it before, and I was blown away by by the end of the movie, the lead performance. The character's name is Sean, yeah, and the actor's name is Nahul Perez Biscayart. I'm sure I butchered that name, but man, that guy just crushes it. He has to do so much, not just emotionally, but physically in the performance, and there's just scenes in there where this guy is just on a whole different plane, like just absolutely crushing it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. Are we ready to dive in and dissect scene by scene here?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so BPM opens up in an ACT UP organizing meeting, which will kind of become a framing device of the movie. The movie is framed around both their meetings to plan direct action and then the direct action themselves. And we're introduced to a number of recurring characters, including Sean, who's kind of the who sees agitation as an essential tool in advocacy. And then there's Tybalt, who is no less passionate but prefers more diplomatic approaches. We've already talked about Sophie, who is kind of the boots on the ground organizer. And then Jeremy, a new member whose health is kind of rapidly deteriorating over the first half of the film.
And Nathan is the other new member that ends up eventually forming a relationship with Sean.
Yeah. So we kind of have this mosaic of activists in the beginning of the movie where we kind of see it from all these different perspectives. And as the movie goes on, its focus kind of narrows on Sean's story specifically. But I really like these organizing scenes that are kind of scenes that are just filled with like passionate bickering around the actions that they're trying to pull off. And I don't know, how do you like these scenes? Because we go back to it probably 6, 7, 8 times of them meeting and organizing these actions to either bring awareness to the AIDS epidemic or things that are meant to put pharmaceutical companies kind of in the spotlight for inaction, or politicians for the same reasons. I just really like these scenes because, as you mentioned before, they do kind of are very real depictions of like organizing efforts and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I'll say first and foremost, from a filmmaking perspective, I think that it's genius to open up first with a direct action and then to go into one of these meetings immediately, because it allows for a lot of exposition building in a way that is not unnatural.
Yeah,
right?
It feels organic to hear them like explain all this stuff that normally in a movie you'd be like, all right, you don't need to tell me what's going on. But yeah, this feels,
because that is how meetings are. Because the thing about being at a social movement organization meeting is that you have, maybe let's say 80% of the people present are people that are there all the time, that are the highly involved, close-knit center, nucleus of the organization. Then maybe, so that's like 80%. Let's say 10% are the people that are more occasional, but are there more consistently. And then like 10% are just new folks, usually people that other people that have brought in, folks that are already in the org have pulled someone else in, or maybe folks that, not in this instance in this movie, but, contemporarily saw something on Facebook or on Instagram, that kind of thing. And so even though most of the people there have already heard it before, you have to do that internal education of, here's what our focus is. This is what this meeting is about. Here are the speaking norms that we're going to follow. And I think it executes that really smoothly, whereas other movies that have that much exposition to deliver might suffer because their format doesn't naturally lend itself to it in the same way that this does. But there are some of the things that I found to be super true about the way these meetings are structured. Like I said, the speaking norms, right? Talking about, you raise your hand, you do talk this way, you don't talk this way.
Sure.
If you're outside, don't engage in debate, right? You have to come and don't what I would call the smaucus, the smoking caucus. You can't be debating out there. The reference to these routinized actions, like they mentioned sending a postcard to somebody that don't require, it's not direct action, right? It doesn't require a lot of planning and coordination, but just, hey, reminder, you can do this every time. The debriefing and report out following an action. An assessment of what worked, what did not work, having people that are designated who participated, the planning, for the upcoming entities, discussing teach-ins. That was mentioned. All of this is stuff that's mentioned in like 3 minutes, right? And then the thing that we can definitely, I think we should get into more, because it does come up recurrently in the movie, is the debates over tactics and tactical conflict. Is one of my favorite things about the depiction of social movement organizing in this film. Was there something that kind of fits in that category that was really interesting to you in the filmmaking?
Yeah, I to my notes zeroed in on the discussions about the tactics. Specifically, we've got Sean, who is very much an agitator and thinks that they should be more aggressive, and things like that. And that is, yeah, I think you probably have more experience with kind of grassroots organizing efforts than I do. So there wasn't as much for me to necessarily relate to, but it did feel extremely like lived in and real. I did a little bit of research on the director, just read a few interviews with him, and he was a person who was involved in these kind of organizing efforts, and I think that's something that really shows. But yeah, I do want to ask you, circling back about the argument about the tactics, that a lot of times they're concerned that their tactics are too aggressive. Thoughts?
Thoughts?
Are
So,
there tactics too? I guess specifically the instance that they say is too aggressive is one of the first actions we see is they invade a meeting of Melton Farm, this pharmaceutical company that claims to have these trial results on a new HIV drug, but are,
protease inhibitors.
yes,
Yeah.
protease inhibitors, but are waiting until they go to this big swanky conference to unveil them. And ACT UP shows up at their offices and basically splashes the office with like water balloons filled with fake blood. And the question at the meeting is, are these tactics too aggressive?
Yeah, so something that I think about a lot in discussions like these, and I think that this movie portrays this really well. And if I had seen it when I was still teaching collective behavior social movements, I absolutely would use this movie or at least these scenes as an example. And that is the idea of radical flank effect. So, radical flank effect comes from research done by Haynes. The initial article, or initial book, was published in 1988, and he was looking at the Southern Civil Rights Movement and looking at the constellation of organizations that were more moderate, more radical, like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, versus more moderate kind of church-based groups. And what he found, and what I have generally also kind of seen to be true in my own experience and in reading and reflecting on other movements, especially throughout American history, is that moderate and radical groups benefit from the existence of each other.
Mhm.
So the idea being moderate groups benefit often financially. They can kind of fundraise on the back of more radical groups
Mhm.
existing. That radical groups can drive things into the public consciousness that moderate groups can then capitalize on. And kind of inversely, that radical groups can rely on moderate groups to be a bridge to other allies, but also to their opponents, and that they can also be legitimating, right, when they meet with them. So we think about in this movie the AIDS, the AIDS, which was a more moderate
Mhm.
organization, being at the table with ACT UP Paris while they're meeting with Melton later in the movie, for example. So I raise this to say, um, one, I think that we should always judge tactics by their efficacy, right? Did they achieve the intended goal? Is there an alignment between the stated goals and objective of the movement, the tactics that were used, and the outcomes that arose from it? But also, too, sometimes the benefits of a tactic are situated in a complex of actors that it's not a straight line. So it's not as simple as like, did you alienate them? It's like, well, did you alienate them? But the other groups that you're aligned with can now do things that you couldn't have done, right? No group can be everything all everywhere all
All
at
at once.
once. And so I think, the question is like, did you do something that motivated your enemy or opponent to take the action that you needed them to take in the constellation of all the other parties that are involved in this battle? And I do think that ACT UP's more extreme tactics do make a lot of sense. One, in light of the intensity and urgency of the AIDS crisis, and the lack of action. And two, because they weren't the only actors that were agitating.
Sure.
And they were doing that in concert with other parties that were more moderate, that could do things that they couldn't, and vice versa. ACT UP could do things that they couldn't.
Yeah, definitely. And for what it's worth, I think that nope, just completely lost it. Gonna have to cut that out. Damn it. I
Yeah.
had something I was
So
about to piggyback on and lost it completely.
was it too extreme? I don't think so. But I think that
neither,
I
yeah.
think that the film operates on the key tension of getting you to ask the question, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the film presents that kind of moderate versus radical dynamic between the relationship of Sean and Thibault. Thibault? Am I saying his name? Thibault? Is that how you say Thibault? Who is kind of the guy who is more concerned with like optics and how the more radical actions will play out amongst the general population, which is something that we kind of see and builds to, well, we'll get to it, but builds to one of my favorite scenes in the movie near the end, but we'll get to that. So yeah, one of the early scenes we see is many of the members of ACT UP Paris in this film are HIV positive, including Sean and this character Jeremy, who's this newer character, newer member of ACT UP. And one of the first really distressing scenes we see is they are in a meeting, kind of a committee meeting in ACT UP, and Jeremy collapses at the meeting. And Jeremy's story kind of becomes the centerpiece for the first half of the movie. And it is devastating in all the right ways. Yeah, what are your thoughts on Jeremy just in general, the character, and what the movie is trying to say through that character?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, one of the ways where I can tell that the filmmaker has biographical experience. Right, because it is one of the things that made organizing against HIV/AIDS, especially in its initial waves of the impact of the academic, so challenging. Is you have people dying underneath you, right? And centering the experience of those that have HIV/AIDS is essential to impressing upon outsiders and the audiences of power outside of the group. But it's also just like inherently a tragic enterprise.
Yeah.
Whew, my God, this is a movie that you can just cry to.
Right. And when the Jeremy storyline happened, I was like, well, that was sad. I'm glad we got over that.
Nope.
And then, oh boy, yeah, it just gets harder to bear. One of the interesting parts that I found is there's not a whole lot of references to it, but there are a lot of references to the idea that many members of the LGBT community resent AIDS activists for essentially scaring them, which is an interesting dynamic that I hadn't really been aware of or thought of before. We get somebody telling, we get a flashback story of somebody hanging flyers when he is kind of accosted by another gay man who tells him, "You scare me with your posters," essentially.
Right, when they're wheat pasting them under a bridge.
Yeah. Are you aware of this kind of dynamic of people who kind of resented AIDS activism for the sake of kind of ginning up fear?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say is that activists are always in the minority. Just numerically speaking. There's a lot of reasons for that, but some of it, or a significant portion of it, has to do with the high cost of activism, right? Dedicating your life to something. It's frustrating. It's boring. There's the opportunity cost. What are all the things that you're not doing because you're spending your time doing this? And then you add in the psychological dimension of this was deeply unsettling, and a lot of people didn't know what the fuck was going on.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes sense that there's a variety of responses. Now, I think that it's neatest, it's cutest, it's prettiest for us to have like a very hemmed in historical narrative, right? Like everyone cared about this or everyone was ready to mobilize, but that's not how history works. History isn't
Yeah.
moved by everyone, being pointed in the same direction. It is shaped by contention and conflict between people, and that includes intra-group conflict.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And one thought that I had while I was watching this, especially the scenes where the people were like, "You're just ginning up, fear and all that," is like, I'm so glad the internet didn't really exist during this period because, Jesus Christ, can you just imagine? Like after seeing,
Can you imagine the suburban mom girlies
oh
that
my
were
god,
responding to monkeypox and acting like fucking toddlers were gonna get monkeypox? It's like, yeah, it would be horrible.
oh my god, yeah,
It was already horrible.
already horrible, and then to add just like what we saw happen with during the COVID pandemic, like to add those people on top of it, of like just being nuts would be, oh, just absolutely insufferable. Um, so yeah, so the movie progresses and we start learning more about Sean, who's kind of this character that's kind of just the agitator at the beginning, and then we start to see more of his personal life, and specifically the first time we see that is when he and Nathan kind of hook up for the first time in a really kind of stirring sex scene, um, which made me realize that I don't think you see too often in movies like condom use presented as sexy um or presented at all as anything other than like a laugh line for the most part, which was in the sex scene with Sean and Nathan. I was struck multiple times by how like adamant the film is about portraying like safe sex and making condom use essential, but not like a punchline in the scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say even more so in that scene is the fact that there kind of is a little bit of pushback from
From
Nathan,
Nathan, yeah, yeah.
right? That
He says, I can't remember what he's
I can't come, like he's like, I can't come while
right,
I'm wearing a
and
condom,
he also
very
asks
classic.
him, you, because Sean says I prefer it with a condom, and he says you prefer it or you want it,
Right.
which is like the initial part of the pushback. Yeah.
Right. So I think like it's a very dynamic scene because like for all the reasons you've said, it portrays it in the context of like a sexy interaction. It's not just fear mongering. In fact, we know that one of these men is pause and one of them is not.
Hmm.
And this exchange is happening and it doesn't feel like something that is totally fraught with anxiety, but is just a natural conversation. But also there is a little bit of pushback, but it's not shown as like um, destroying
Sure. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
dynamic that they have. That it's just part of it, and Sean emphasizes that this is important, and then they move on together and fuck.
Yeah. And Nathan seems almost like the avatar of the like viewer who might be coming into it slightly less informed on safe practices and things like that. And yeah, that guy, what's his name? I want to say his name. That actor Arnaud Valois is the guy who plays Nathan, and he's also very good. He just has the misfortune of having most of his scenes with Sean, who just absolutely steals the show in every scene he's in. Um, but yeah, I really liked that scene, that sex scene. We also get Sean's story, which is just fucked up beyond belief, in that he was infected by his high school math teacher when he was 16, and it is implied that the math teacher knew he was positive and didn't disclose.
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell.
It's
It's
hard to tell
definitely,
there because
yeah.
I think he's
Sean says, I'm not sure.
and it was like relatively
Early.
early,
Yeah.
because he is in his late 20s
In the
by the
okay,
time
yeah,
that
yeah.
we
So he
see
would have
him.
been
So I
early
mean, it
80s.
would have been like very early
Yeah.
in the cycle. But I do think again that's a way that the writer and director is seeding in. There are dynamics that exist between um, younger gay men and older gay men that are just as the same thing, to be very clear, just as the same thing is very true with straight men, right? That are laden with power dynamics. But in some ways, it's exacerbated because, especially at that time, younger gay men didn't have access to community
Mm.
to help um, acquaint them, right, with their sexuality and their identities, that this is what they had in many cases was like more predatory older men. So I think it's good that it's in there because it's a very real experience. Um, but I think it's again just the director and writer trying to seed in some of these other life experiences or pathways that may have been common for young gay men for that era, right? To make it realistic.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of at this point that the film shifts its focus and begins becoming more of Sean's story. And Sean kind of embodies the general sense that I got from this movie, which is like the paradoxical feeling of optimistic hopelessness. Like these are people that won't stop fighting, but at the same time have been doing it for so long with so little to show for it. And we really see that through Sean, who's this, at the beginning of the movie, this really fiery agitator. And by the end, or as the movie progresses, is becoming more and more just forlorn and hopeless, and has to kind of wrestle with that part of it. And this is really when it becomes more of his story. But before we really focus on Sean, we do have um, Jeremy's scene, which is well, first off, Jeremy's condition, he's beginning to deteriorate quicker than anyone realized or would have thought. And one thing he tells the group is he tells them to parade his corpse with whistles and foghorns, which is a very powerful line, essentially saying, "Don't let my death be in vain. When I die, make a lot of noise about it and let people know how I died and why I died." Um, and we see that scene in this kind of this wake.
Are you familiar with David Wojnarowicz?
I am not.
So he is a American, but an artist and AIDS activist who said and wore a leather jacket that had a paint on it. When I die, like, put my body on the steps of the FDA. So that is, I mean, that was a thing that was happening, or a sentiment, right? The politicization of death. Like, our death is already politicized, so we might as well use it as a tool in our favor.
Mm.
But just like there were a few specific lines that I was like, this feels very evocative of him.
Sure, yeah.
In particular. So I just wanted to raise that. So.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing this movie does really well is because, as far as I can tell, please correct me if I'm wrong, but these are all fictional characters.
Yes.
And
yeah.
fictional pharmaceutical companies, and because I don't believe Melton Farm is a real company, more of just a amalgamation of pharmaceutical companies in general. I was gonna say I researched it. I'm gonna be very honest. I Googled it, and and I did not get any confirmation that Melton Farm is a real company. But
I agree. I think it is, but I will say all the governmental entities that they talk about are real.
Are real, yeah. And some of we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like the contaminated blood scandal and all that were real,
right,
and all that. But I think, yeah, that is something that this movie does really well, is kind of bringing these real elements and into the movie itself.
Oh yeah, for sure. Something I wanted to mention. We had kind of talked about maybe having him on as a guest. He wasn't able to do it, but I did want to raise some of his research. One of my good friends, and who Craig also knows, his name is Jason Demores, and he is a sociologist who focuses on sexuality, and particular HIV/AIDS. And he recently had an article published called "Cultural Discourses and HIV/AIDS Activist Meetings About PrEP," which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. If you're not familiar, Truvada is the pill that folks often talk about. People take it so they can reduce the likelihood of contracting HIV/AIDS. But this article that Jason recently published in Culture, Health, and Sexuality is about how activists now, contemporarily, have a very complicated relationship with PrEP, both in the fact that they want want pharmaceutical companies to be involved in prevention, but also that they don't trust the
Sure.
medical
Yeah. Yeah.
establishment, and that also, they don't want a bottoms up approach that's totally driven by activists, like the ACT UP model. Like, literally his respondents are saying this, like, we don't want the
Mhm.
ACT UP model, but also they want agency and for people who are directly impacted to be shaping what's going on. And this reminded me a lot of the negotiations that were happening in the movie with the activists and the protease inhibitors, and the debates internally about
Mhm.
whether or not they should be pursuing that, about the advocacy that went on with Jeremy, where Jeremy says, like, my medication's not working, and they're like, we're gonna, let us figure out what you need to do, let me see your file, and they're looking for it. But it's like none of those things were a straight line. There was a lot of
Right.
conflict over what's the right way through. And so I just wanted to raise, Jason's my friend, and he's doing really cool research, and also that these debates are not settled, right? Like, that these internal movement conflicts, and conflicts amongst people who are navigating these experiences, are not totally settled either.
Yeah. 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 Um, so yeah, we see the scene where Jeremy does eventually succumb to the disease, and we have this incredible sequence where his wake becomes this protest, and I think it's Sean that's giving the monologue, the voiceover monologue over it, comparing Jeremy and ACT UP as a whole to the populist uprising in 1848 that led to the February Revolution and kind of the third French Revolution of sorts, in a really powerful scene. I really like that scene a lot. It's just vivacious and somber at the same time. Yeah, I just love that whole sequence.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, like, frankly, there has to be a little bit of myth making in
Hmm.
organizing,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like,
for sure.
you have to be instilled with faith and hope and optimism that you will win, right? Like, it's a very classic chant for the last 30 years or more of, I believe that we will win. Like,
Yeah.
it's his equivalent of that is, like, situating it
Hmm.
in historical context in France. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So after Jeremy dies, we do have that shift where the movie becomes more of Sean's story, especially. But one thing that I do want to touch on is at one of the meetings, it comes up the contaminated blood scandal, which was in 1984 and 1985, France's National Blood Transfusion Center knowingly distributed HIV infected blood to a number of hemophiliacs and other patients who required transfusions. Um, and this leads to a very interesting sequence and scene where there's a woman who's in ACT UP named Helene, whose son contracted AIDS from the blood scandal, and she's kind of put on blast because she has a friendly relationship with the French government and specifically the transfusion center. Um, I believe it was the transfusion center. I can't couldn't quite tell what is the nature of her relationship. Did you understand what, like, because but essentially they put out this letter explicitly calling out these people, and she does not respond well to it because she has this working relationship with them.
So the issue in question there, I'm really glad you're raising this because I think it's a really interesting part of the movie, is actually the opposite. She doesn't have a good relationship with them. She's calling for jail time, and
Right.
the radicals in the
Okay.
group don't think that you should do that, because they're opposed to the criminal legal system as a whole. In fact, I think I have, like, the exact
Right. Yeah.
Sean. Yeah, so Sean and Max are in conflict with Helen because of the calling for the jail of the people implicated in the tainted blood. And Sean says, we all got trapped into asking for jail time, and makes reference to the logic of the system. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't, like, you are forcing us into their logic when we have opposed this, because one of the major things that ACT UP did in Paris, but, like, everywhere that it existed, was acknowledging that jails and prisons were a site of infection and were
Hmm.
a site of people not gaining access to treatment. And so they're pissed because she is, like, these people need to go to jail, and it's like, nah, that's not what we do. And I think that like it's super relevant because this happens a lot currently. Like this, I've been part of conversations like this with people disagreeing over jailing killer cops.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, do we call for killer cops to receive jail time if they're convicted? Do we care about them being convicted? Are there other pathways to justice?
Sure.
And so, yeah, that was my read on what is happening there with Helene.
Yeah, it was a really interesting dynamic in within those scenes, and I'm glad that we got, because Helene's not in it for too much, but I do like those scenes where we get to see kind of them interact with her.
For sure. I think there's a really interesting tension between, across this movie, but especially with her, between people who are directly impacted by people who are not directly impacted but belong to a population that could be, like Nathan, or people that are not directly impacted in the sense of being paused or having the likelihood of being paused, but love people who are paused,
Sure.
the mothers of people who are paused, that kind of thing. You know, I think there's a lot of tension comes out of that. Like, who is the constituent and who should have the most say?
Yeah. So as we go on from here, Sean's condition starts to deteriorate, and this is the part where the actor Biscayart, Naul Perez Biscayart, who plays Sean, is just, I mean, he has a few scenes here where he's just next level crushing it. But the one that really stood out to me is they're at a meeting when they're talking about a protest that they're going to do, and Thibault suggests that they put the more visibly sick members in the front, and which is a pretty callous thing to state. I mean, I get the point he's getting at, but Sean has this explosion where he yells, "Am I not sick enough?" In a really powerful scene that kind of points out that Sean is becoming more jaded as he realizes how little time he has left and how little has actually been accomplished since his initial diagnosis, and it's just a heartbreaking moment in the movie.
Yeah, I think it's an inflection point, right, of him acknowledging that he's not going to get better. But also, as is true with many social movements, his entire social life is also wrapped up in this space. You know, like these are his loved one, like his lover is here, his friends are here. So like he can't not fight.
Right. Yeah.
With what time he has left. But that's it's not an easy truth to accept for him at that point, I think.
Yeah, and in the relationship between Sean and Thibault, it becomes very interesting. And my favorite scene in the movie is Sean is sick to the point that he is admitted to the hospital and is kind of fighting bouts of like lucidity and being like sedated, and Thibault comes to visit him, and there's obvious animosity, and Thibault says to Sean, "We don't like each other, but we're friends." And Sean's response is to just leave, and it's just a really powerful, heartbreaking scene of like these two people who are both very passionate and come at it from different angles and have to kind of navigate their own relationship with each other while one of them is dying. It's just a really complex emotional scene there, and I still don't know quite what I think about it, other than I really responded to it and I like that scene a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. It seems like people that are bound together by the circumstances of fate, and everyone is kind of disquieted by
Yeah.
that.
It's like we have this thing in common, which is the most important thing. So who cares if we hate each other on every other level? Like, we are united in this one mission.
Especially when the outgroup, right, the people in power and straight people surrounding them are so virulently hateful.
Yeah.
Like, all they have is each other. And obviously Sean loves some of those people more than others. But really all they have is each other, including the people that otherwise would not connect on any other level, you know?
Yeah. All right, we ready to get into this final act?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I respect I respect the hell out of Robin Campillo for showing us all the little nitty gritty, awful details that come with what happens next. But goddamn, it was not fun to watch. We see that Sean he is approaching the end, and they move him back into his apartment, and Nathan and his mom are there, and we got this really great sequence of Sean's labored breathing, played over the river. I'm terrible with geography. What's that river? Is it the Rhine? The Seine? One of them?
The Seine?
Huh?
The Seine?
Sure. Let's go with it. But they dye it red as a protest movement, and we see that with Sean's labored breathing over it. And we have just the heartbreaking scene of them all realizing that he has almost no time left, and they're trying to get his affairs in order while letting him like depart peacefully. And eventually we see Nathan he does euthanize Sean in these like last agonizing moments. And it's devastating.
Yeah, I think that the end is really brutal. One, because we've seen real humanity in Sean and grown attached to him as a character.
Sure.
But also because with, Nathan's final act, as it relates to Sean, and the other behavior that we see surrounding it is like sometimes love is doing things that you don't want to do, or sometimes love is doing things that are brutal.
Yeah.
Even if their ultimate impact is what the person wanted.
Yeah.
And it's just like emotionally terrorizing.
Right.
It's a very hard final act.
Brutal final act, and not even so much of Sean's death, but the scenes after it where taping the eyes closed and changing the clothes and just these mundane tasks that you don't really think about when a loved one dies. And I read an interview with Robin Campillo, and one of his quotes was, "I have changed the clothes of, I have put new clothes on a corpse of someone I loved." So like this is another sequence where that feels very real and lived in, and obviously was because the director has lived that. But one of Sean's final acts, which as a little stinker myself who likes to cause problems, I definitely love this, which is Sean requests that his ashes be given to the insurance companies, and we see the final organized action of the film is Act Up bringing his ashes to a insurance banquet. What was that? A banquet? A conference? Some swanky shit where they got food.
Yeah,
and
I
they
think
throw Sean's ashes all over the food.
I love that they throw it over the food.
So gross.
I just have to say, because there's something like, and also you can avoid assault charges, is what I assume, right? So like, again, even on the most like minute level, the writer director is like, if they go and throw it on people, I'm sure you get an assault charge for like throwing dead body shit or whatever. I don't know exactly what that charge would be, but it wouldn't be good, right?
That's it. That's the official charge. Throwing dead body shit.
Versus if you do it on the food, you spoil their good fun and all their money is wasted.
Yeah.
But there's less risk inherent in it, and I love that it ends the way that it starts. Just like ultimately, the movement is centered. We see the emotional through lines. We see people's experience through it, but the movement is where it begins and where it ends.
Yeah, it was great, and I really like this movie. I'm glad that you selected it. I had not seen it before. I learned a lot in this movie of stuff that I did not know about of the AIDS epidemic and the crisis. Before we end, do we want to get our conservative reaction to this movie?
Oh my god.
Listen, I asked if you wanted it.
I do want it. I'm just a little worried. What is it? White?
It is. Okay. He did review this movie.
See, that makes sense because I can't remember. I could look it up, but honestly, I don't super care, so I'm not going to. But when this came out in 2017, it was like a pretty, maybe not huge deal, but like a big enough deal at whatever festival. I can't remember if it was Cannes or TIFF or what. Probably Cannes, honestly, since it's French. So that doesn't shock me that Armond White would review it because of that.
So now my question is, did Armond White like this movie?
I don't think so, mostly because there was I don't know, a scene where a man is jerking off his boyfriend who's lying in bed dying of AIDS. I feel like stuff like that is going to turn off
It would've
Mr.
been like,
White.
yeah.
But I don't know. Like across the whole. So lay it on me.
Armond White loved this movie. So in our first episode, we tried to articulate why we both like Armond White so much, and it's because he says incredibly stupid things and has very frequently laughable opinions, but he is cinematically literate and has occasionally cogent things to say, and actually he makes some good points about BPM, but it wouldn't be an Armond White review if he didn't find a way to just shit on something for no reason. So in his review of BPM, much like his end of the year better than lists, it is not a review of BPM. It is a dual review of BPM with another movie he did not like, which was Novitiate? Novitiate? Do you know this?
Is this
the Nun movie?
I
never
love
saw it.
Nun movies.
Yeah,
What?
I never saw it, but it is
Could you spell that?
yes, Novitiate.
Okay, I definitely have not seen it.
It is a movie. I have not seen it either. It is a woman that is trained to become a nun and dealing with like her own sexuality and things like that. And
Well, I'll let you know this. I'm absolutely going to watch it because I fucking love a nun movie. Though I will say I do tend to prefer ones that are like a little more salacious than this probably is.
gotcha. Yeah.
But all right.
Well, the reason he didn't like it is because he is a bit of a Christian fascist and does not like that Novitiate is basically criticizing Catholicism. So here are a few choice quotes.
Do you think? Oh, did he? I wonder if he's reviewed Benedetta. Sorry.
Oh God.
Did you see Benedetta?
I have not seen it, but I know what it is.
Oh my God, it's so
I'm
good.
Like, why would Armond White watch this? Like, sometimes you just know this movie's not made for me. Like, why is Armond White watching certain things? So one of the first things he says about BPM is it is a near great film about hope and suffering that gives sex its proper rank in the scale of human relations, which, great point, Armond White. He also says BPM is unsurprisingly dares an epic humanizing format, similar to such classics as Nashville, okay, Intolerance, which is the movie that was made after Birth of a Nation. Why am I blanking on who made Birth of a Nation?
D.W. Griffith.
D.W. Griffith that made after Birth of a Nation. I saw Intolerance once, years and years ago. I don't see what the connective tissue is between Intolerance and BPM, but Armond White does. He also says that it's a relief that Campillo depicts his AIDS activists as energetic, passionate youths who argue with each other without being in political lockstep. Again, great point, Armond White. But throughout the review, he's also shitting on this movie, Novitiate. I've been probably saying that so wrong, but he really hates it because it is anti-Catholic, and he says it is it undermines the church as repressive and outdated. And this is my favorite thing that he says in the review. He says this movie emphasizes the lead character's lesbian stirrings.
Great. Okay, just so we're clear, that absolutely, I'm gonna watch this movie in the next 48 hours. Like,
also, I think it just like the concept of like, do you know the concept of like not in my backyard, like idiots that get mad at like they're like, hey, don't
NIMBY.
PC, man, you're too PC. But the second you step foot on their turf of something they care about, they suddenly are very like, hey, man, that's not cool. Whereas like Armond White is a gay man who is like recognizes the humanity.
What?
Yeah, Armond White is gay.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he is. So Armond White is a gay man who recognizes how BPM accurately and delicately and humanely paints this portrait of gay activists in the 1990s, but then with this other movie, he's like, nah, girls want to be gay too? Nah, we ain't cool with women. So like he just is like straight down the line of like the second it steps foot like across whatever he's comfortable with, he does not like it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have two more parts that I pulled from his review. One I labeled
Okay.
vintage Armond White, and one I labeled chef's kiss Armond White. They're both a little bit long, but here's vintage Armond White. Oh, I forgot to mention one of the funniest parts of his review is that the title of this dual review movie is Radicalizing Youth Via the Movies. He says,
Okay.
radicalization can happen through different methods, and though movies might seem to be the most benign, their impact is worth serious thought. Campillo celebrates joie de vivre, brother and sisterhood. A secular wake is the film's emotional high point. Betts, who is the director of the other one, may not be Santana or Gloria Steinem, but she knows her market supports radicalization. Thus, her pessimist film won a Sundance Film Festival prize. It is essentially a new kind of calling card film, which Armond White thinks he made up this new term for movies called calling card, which is just basically another way for a conservative to say virtue signaling.
I just like that he's referencing Gloria Steinem like she's doing any organizing in literal decades.
It's because he knows like 3 leftists, and he has to be like throwing them in.
Well, he can't bother knowing any lesbians.
Well, apparently. Yeah. Now, this next part has a great name drop in it, and it's early. Both BPM and Novitiate pretend to be counterculture when they actually are what Paul Joseph Watson called dominant culture films.
Paul Joseph Watson. That's that dumb fuck that is like the meme, right?
Which meme?
Of like that.
Probably. He's okay. So he's was an
like
Infowars.
British? Yes.
He's British.
Yeah.
He does these really annoying videos that he like. He's an idiot and can't string together a coherent thought. So if you watch his videos, they're so fucking annoying because every 3 seconds is a cut of him just screaming at the camera.
Yeah.
But Armond White finds him to be.
I'm gonna try and get Mike, my husband, listener, to send me the meme that he uses of him to confirm that we're talking about the same person.
We have to be. Yeah, British, like kind of a good-looking guy, but says the most annoying shit on the planet. But he,
it's Paul. What's
Paul Joseph Watson? Yeah. This part made me laugh though. He said he really. Did you see the movie How to Survive a Plague, the documentary about the AIDS crisis?
Yes.
Armond White hated that because it bashed the Catholic Church in it.
Does he know what ACT UP is outside of the context of this movie? I mean, I think the thing is like, okay, so I think this is also illustrative of a social movement dynamic of, like, as I said earlier on when we were talking about the movie, you want to have your objectives and goals align with your audience, which aligns with your overarching strategy and then their tactics, and then the intended outcomes, right? Like all those things need to be in accordance with each other. And I don't know for a fact if ACT UP Paris like was targeting the Catholic Church. I just don't. I'm not as familiar with that as in the United States. But like in America, ACT UP was targeting them because condom usage was like the only thing that they could focus on because the FDA wasn't doing jack shit.
Right.
So like it was a necessary.
Yeah, he's acting like there is no motivation for targeting the Catholic Church.
Well, and also that it was essential. I guess my point is like, why would you'd be like, oh, I love this movie, and then like be grumpy about what ACT UP was doing when like it's part and parcel. My point is like it's all interconnected. It's all driven by the same motivation. It's just like the target might differ depending on like the institutional configuration that you're embedded in.
Yeah, he either doesn't know what ACT UP is or is just so dense that he's like,
this is brand new information.
Right, yeah.
This movie is brand new information.
But the thing that he said that I really liked was he called How to Survive a Plague. This was just an aside in his review. This was my chef's kiss moment. He said he's saying an aside about How to Survive a Plague, which he calls a church-bashing film, and then at the end he says, which Michael Moore endorsed. Which, like, who the fuck cares about what Michael Moore thinks anyways?
Is it literal 2002?
Right, like, why do conservatives think that, like, leftists give a shit what Michael Moore thinks, let alone treat him as, like, the the leftist like messiah. Like, who the fuck cares about Michael Moore? I don't care about Michael Moore.
Leftists don't care about Michael Moore.
No, nobody likes Michael Moore. Like, this is the one thing Armond White and us can agree on.
I guarantee you, if I went and found like the most radical students on any of the campuses in Tallahassee, I feel very like this is a very conservative estimate. Like, no more than 10% would know what that name is without me naming movies.
Right. Yeah. He's not the...
That was like when we were in high school.
Right. Yeah.
That was the like leftist film touch point.
Because he shit on George Bush at the Oscars in like 2003 or something and became the boogeyman for conservatives for like 20 years afterwards.
Also, like, Bowling for Columbine is like so dated now because they're just the shooting in schools problem is way worse than it was at the time
it's
of the movie. Like,
we need a sequel or something. God.
Yeah,
actually,
I feel
don't,
like,
Michael Moore. If you're listening, we don't need that sequel. Please do not
banish you to
Bowling for Columbine 2 Requiem.
Still bowling. Still
bowling.
Columbine.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. Before we go, Hal, do you have any final thoughts?
I want to say, inspired by what Tebow says at one point when he's giving a speech, that I hope that we all can approach the work with a positive and combative attitude.
Hell yeah.
See you next time.
Indeed. Kill the poor tonight. Go, 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 go.